Welcome back to Lyric Chronicles. Imagine a time, the late 1800s, when the map of Africa was being redrawn by European powers. A relentless scramble for territory was underway, and one by one, ancient kingdoms and proud nations were falling under colonial rule. But amidst this continental conquest, one nation stood defiantly independent: Ethiopia. A rugged, mountainous land, home to a history stretching back millennia, and ruled by a leader whose name would echo through the ages, Emperor Menelik II. Menelik wasn't just a king. He was a master strategist, a unifier, and a guardian of his people's sovereignty. He watched as the world around him changed, as foreign flags were planted on African soil. He knew the threat was real, and it was closing in. Italy, a newly unified nation itself, was eager to build a colonial empire to rival its European neighbors. After establishing a foothold in neighboring Eritrea, Italy turned its ambitions toward the grand prize, Ethiopia. In 1889, Italian diplomats arrived at Menelik's court. They proposed a pact of friendship and commerce, the Treaty of Wuchel. On the surface, it seemed like a standard agreement between two nations. Menelik, seeking to modernize his country and maintain peaceful relations, agreed to sign. But hidden within the treaty was a deliberate and calculated act of deception. The treaty was written in two languages, Italian and Amharic, Ethiopia's official language. The Amharic version, the one Menelik and his court read and signed, stated that Ethiopia could, if it wished, use Italy's services for its foreign relations. It was an optional clause, a simple offer of diplomatic assistance. However, the Italian version told a very different story. Article 17, in the Italian text, declared that Ethiopia was now obliged to conduct all its foreign affairs through Italy, effectively making Ethiopia a protectorate, a colony in all but name. When Menelik discovered the treachery, his response was not that of a weak or frightened ruler. It was the roar of a betrayed lion. He was furious. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. It was an attack on Ethiopia's very soul, its right to exist as a sovereign nation. He immediately penned letters to the other great powers of Europe: Britain, France, Germany, and Russia, exposing Italy's duplicity. He laid out the facts, presenting both versions of the treaty and declaring, "Ethiopia has need of no one. She stretches out her hands unto God." But in the grand chess game of European imperialism, Italy's claims were accepted, and Menelik's protests were largely ignored. The Italian government, arrogant and overconfident, dismissed him. They saw Ethiopia as a collection of disparate tribes, an uncivilized kingdom ripe for the taking. They believed their modern army and superior technology would make quick work of what they considered a backward African force. They had fatally underestimated their opponent. While Italy prepared for what they assumed would be an easy military parade, Menelik was preparing for war. He knew diplomacy had failed and that his nation's freedom would have to be defended with blood and iron. He embarked on a monumental task, uniting the vast and diverse regions of Ethiopia. For centuries, the country had been a patchwork of powerful regional lords, often at odds with one another. But Menelik, through skill, diplomacy, and sheer force of will, rallied them to a single cause. He reminded them of their shared history, their shared faith, and their shared threat. Princes and warlords who were once his rivals now pledged their armies to him. Simultaneously, Menelik was orchestrating a massive logistical operation. He began stockpiling grain and supplies, ensuring his army could march and fight for months, even years if necessary. And most crucially, he armed his people. While the Italians publicly scoffed at Ethiopia's military capabilities, Menelik was secretly importing modern rifles and artillery from France and Russia, nations who saw an opportunity to check Italy's ambitions. He was building an army that would not just rival Italy's, but in many ways, surpass it in numbers and motivation. The Italians in Eritrea saw only whispers of this mobilization, dismissing it as the disorganized posturing of a minor king. They had no idea that deep in the highlands of East Africa, a storm was gathering. A nation was unifying. An army of unprecedented size was being forged, not for conquest, but for survival. The battle line was being drawn, not on a map in Rome, but in the hearts of 1 million Ethiopians. And as the Italian forces began their march inland, they were marching toward a confrontation that would shock the world and redefine the narrative of colonialism. Ethiopia would not kneel. This call was for everyone, every province, every warrior, every man and woman capable of holding a weapon. His message was simple, powerful, and resonated across the entire empire. rise, for Ethiopia, for our freedom. Imagine hearing that call echoing through the mountains and valleys, from the heartlands of Sho all the way to the northern region of Tigray. Now, you have to understand, Ethiopia back then wasn't a unified, modern nation like we think of today. It was a complex patchwork of different regions, cultures, and leaders, often with their own rivalries. But Menelik's leadership was so compelling that it brought everyone together. Even his longtime rivals, like the legendary warrior Ras Alula, answered the call and stood beside him. This wasn't just about loyalty to an emperor. It was about protecting their shared home, their heritage, their independence. And then there was Empress Taytu Betel. If you think she was just a queen sitting on a throne, you couldn't be more wrong. Taytu was a force of nature, brilliant, fierce, and a master strategist in her own right. She wasn't just a supportive wife. She rallied her own personal army, and get this, she actually led them into battle herself. There's a famous quote attributed to her where she declared, "Those who love their country will follow me," and they did. Thousands followed her, inspired by her courage. Together, Menelik and Taytu assembled a massive force. We're talking over 100,000 fighters. It was a sight to behold, cavalry charging across the plains, infantry marching in formation, and even priests holding sacred crosses right next to soldiers carrying rifles. On paper, they were severely outmatched. Their equipment was a mix of old and new, and it was nothing compared to the standardized modern army of a European power. But the Ethiopians had something far more powerful than matching uniforms. They had unity, a burning belief in their cause, and an intimate knowledge of their own land. Menelik wasn't just a charismatic leader. He was also incredibly shrewd. For years, he had been playing the diplomatic game, quietly purchasing modern rifles and artillery from France and Russia, building up a secret stockpile of weapons. Italy expected Ethiopia to be a divided, poorly armed nation that would simply crumble at the first sign of a modern army. Instead, under the threat of invasion, Ethiopia became stronger and more united than ever before. Meanwhile, on the Italian side, the commander, General Baratieri, was brimming with colonial arrogance. He completely underestimated the Ethiopians. He looked at their diverse army and thought they would scatter like birds at the first sound of Italian cannons. He saw their faith and traditions as weakness, not strength. He was convinced this would be a quick, easy victory to secure Italy's place among the great colonial powers. But Menelik was a patient man. He understood that a battle is won not just with courage, but with logistics. He refused to rush into a fight. Instead, he meticulously planned every detail. He established complex supply chains, using the knowledge of local people to move food, water, and ammunition through incredibly rough, unforgiving terrain. His planning ensured that his massive army could stay in the field and hold its position for months if necessary, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And so, in the early months of 1896, the moment came. The great Ethiopian army began its march north, towards a small, dusty town in the Tigray region called Adwa. This was it. The final confrontation was drawing near. All across the world, newspapers and governments were watching. The expectation was clear: another swift, brutal European victory over an African nation. It had happened countless times before, but Ethiopia wasn't just any nation, and Menelik and Taytu weren't just any leaders. History was about to be shocked, and the world was about to witness something truly extraordinary. The road to Adwa was a brutal one. Imagine steep, jagged mountains, winding paths that seemed to go nowhere, and biting highland winds that cut right through you. But through it all, Emperor Menelik's army marched on, their spirits high, their resolve unbreakable. This wasn't just a single army. It was a nation on the move. Each unit carried the banner of their home province, Tigray, Shoa, Wallo, Gojam. For the first time, they weren't just separate regions. They were a united force, bound together by a common purpose: to defend their freedom. Riding at the very front was Emperor Menelik to himself, a commanding figure alongside his brilliant generals. And right there with him was the formidable Empress Taytu. She wasn't just there for show. She was a true leader, a strategist, and a warrior. Taytu commanded her own force of over 5,000 troops, complete with modern artillery units. Her intelligence and fierce presence gave the Ethiopian army a secret weapon, an edge the Italians never saw coming. Her involvement wasn't just inspiring, it was a game changer. Meanwhile, the Italian forces under the command of General Baratieri had dug in on the ridges surrounding Adwa, but their confidence was fragile. Baratieri was torn, caught between attacking and waiting. His supplies were dwindling, and the pressure from Rome was immense. The politicians back home demanded a quick, decisive victory to cement their colonial ambitions. They had no patience for a long, drawn-out standoff in the Ethiopian highlands. The clock was ticking. On the leap day, February 29, 1896, the pressure finally broke him. Baratieri made the fateful call. He ordered his troops to advance on Adwa under the cover of night. His plan was to divide his army into 3 separate columns and launch a surprise attack at dawn, catching the Ethiopians off guard. It was a bold move, but it was based on a fatal miscalculation. He believed he was the hunter, but he was walking straight into a trap. What Baratieri didn't know was that Menelik's eyes were everywhere. Ethiopian scouts, masters of the terrain, had been tracking the Italians' every move. They knew every path, every ridge, and every valley. While the Italians saw a scattered, disorganized enemy, the Ethiopians saw a landscape they knew like the back of their hands, a landscape that was about to become their greatest ally. The stage was set for a confrontation that would echo through history. As the sun rose over the mountains of Adwa on March 1, 1896, the silence was shattered. The battle began not with a single shot, but with a roar. From the ridges, from the valleys, from seemingly nowhere, Ethiopia's warriors emerged like a tidal wave. The Italian columns, marching confidently just moments before, found themselves completely surrounded, isolated, and hopelessly outnumbered. Their surprise attack had turned into their worst nightmare. Chaos erupted. Bullets tore through the air, spears flew with deadly accuracy, and the ground itself seemed to tremble with the sound of war cries and cannon fire. Menelik's top generals, men like Ras Makhanan, who was the father of the future Emperor Haile Selassie, and the legendary Ras Alula, led furious charges, breaking the Italian lines again and again. Empress Taytu's artillery, positioned perfectly, unleashed devastating barrages, decimating enemy formations. The Italian soldiers, completely lost in the confusing, unfamiliar terrain, were cut off from each other. Their commanders couldn't coordinate, their maps were useless, and their morale plummeted. They fell by the thousands, not just to bullets and spears, but to the sheer tactical genius of the Ethiopian defense. This wasn't just a battle. It was a masterclass in guerrilla warfare fought on a grand scale. The Battle of Adwa had begun, and for the people of Ethiopia, this was more than a fight for victory. It was a fight for their very existence. They were fighting to live. This incredible story is a testament to unity, strategy, and the unbreakable spirit of a nation defending its home. It's a moment in history that deserves to be remembered. General Baratieri's desperate gamble had failed spectacularly, and now Ethiopia was ready to strike with devastating force. It started with Ras Makhanan's troops hitting the right flank. They smashed through the Italian defenses like a tidal wave, overwhelming everything in their path. At the same time, Ras Alula's warriors, veterans hardened by years of constant warfare, launched a brutal ambush on the Italian center column. And on the left, a storm of bullets, arrows, and blades was unleashed by Empress Taytu's forces and Ras Mikhail's powerful cavalry. The coordinated attack was a masterpiece of military strategy. The Italian soldiers, many of them young conscripts with little training, were completely surrounded. Panic set in. Some tried to make a desperate retreat, while others simply dropped their rifles and surrendered. But there was no way out. The Ethiopian warriors closed every escape route, giving no quarter. The battlefield became a symphony of terror, echoing with war cries, relentless gunfire, and the desperate shouts of the invading army. Within a matter of hours, the scale of the disaster for Italy became clear. 7,000 of their soldiers lay dead. Thousands more were wounded or captured, including high-ranking officers and even generals. The once proud colonial army was broken. The Ethiopian forces had also suffered heavy losses, with over 4,000 warriors killed in the ferocious fighting. But their spirit remained unbroken. Their sacrifice had secured something priceless. When the smoke finally cleared from the highlands of Adwa, a flag still waved proudly in the wind. It wasn't the green, white, and red of Italy. It was the proud banner of Ethiopia. The news sent shockwaves across the globe. A black African nation had decisively defeated a modern European empire. The world was stunned into disbelief. In the capitals of Europe, colonial ambitions were suddenly checked by a new reality. Back in Rome, the government was thrown into chaos. The Italian public, who had been whipped into a frenzy for empire building, now took to the streets in protest. They were furious. Their sons, brothers, and fathers had been sent to die for a lie, for a dream of conquest that had turned into a nightmare. The political fallout was immense, and the Italian government collapsed. But in the hills of Ethiopia, there was only jubilation. Victory celebrations echoed across the land. Emperor Menelik II, calm and resolute in his triumph, showed remarkable statesmanship. He refused to humiliate the thousands of captured Italian soldiers. Instead, he offered them an honorable release, but on one non-negotiable condition: Italy had to recognize Ethiopia's full, complete, and undeniable independence. Faced with military catastrophe and political turmoil at home, Italy had no choice. On October 26, 1896, they signed the Treaty of Addis Ababa. The treaty formally ended the war and, most importantly, revoked the treaty that had claimed Ethiopia as a protectorate. Italy's colonial dreams in the region were shattered. Ethiopia remained free, independent, uncolonized. This historic victory wasn't a matter of luck. It was the result of brilliant strategy, unwavering courage, and the powerful unity of a people determined to defend their homeland. The Battle of Adwa became a symbol of resistance and a beacon of hope for colonized people all over the world. It proved that the will of a united nation could overcome even the most powerful of empires. The victory at Adwa wasn't just a win for Ethiopia, it became a symbol for the entire African continent. Imagine this. It's the late 19th century. The scramble for Africa is in full swing. European powers are gathering in fancy rooms, drawing lines on maps, carving up a continent they barely understood, as if it were an empty land. But one nation, nestled in the highlands of East Africa, stood firm and shouted back a message that would echo through history: "We are not yours to take." This was Ethiopia, and its moment of truth came at the Battle of Adwa. News of this incredible triumph spread like wildfire. Across Africa, from the bustling coasts of Senegal to the deep rivers of the Congo, people whispered the name of the Ethiopian emperor, Menelik II. He wasn't just a king who won a battle. He became a legend, a symbol that resistance was possible. This hope traveled across the Atlantic, reaching the Black diaspora in the Americas. In places like Harlem, in New York, in Jamaica, in Haiti, communities that knew the bitter sting of oppression, people celebrated Ethiopia's victory. It was a beacon of strength, a powerful testament that colonialism wasn't an unstoppable, invincible force. Ethiopia became a living example of Black sovereignty and pride, a real-life Wakanda before the world had ever imagined it. Now, let's talk about the other side. For Italy, the colonial power that had tried to conquer Ethiopia, the loss at Adwa was absolutely devastating. It was more than just a military defeat. It was a profound national humiliation. This was the first time in modern history that a European army had been so decisively defeated by an African power. The news sent shockwaves through Europe's colonial capitals, shaking the very foundation of their supposed superiority. It forced them to reconsider their ambitions and acknowledge that Africa would not simply bow down. Back in Ethiopia, Emperor Menelik II emerged not just as a national hero, but as a legendary African statesman. He was a brilliant strategist, a unifier who brought together diverse peoples to defend their shared home. And alongside him stood the formidable Empress Taytu. She wasn't just a silent figure behind the throne. She was a brilliant military advisor and a fierce leader in her own right, commanding her own army on the battlefield. Her role was crucial, and she became an enduring symbol of resistance, intelligence, and female power. But the message of Adwa was larger than any single crown, any general, or any battlefield. Its true power lay in its simple, universal truths. Unity wins. When people from different backgrounds put aside their differences for a common cause, they are unstoppable. Courage wins. Facing a technologically superior army with unwavering bravery can change the course of history. And perhaps most importantly, knowing your worth wins. Ethiopia fought not just for land, but for its identity, its history, and its dignity. Think about the timeline of African independence. Long before the powerful chants for freedom shook colonial capitals in the mid-20th century, long before the flags of free nations like Ghana, Kenya, and Nigeria rose proudly against the sky, Adwa happened. It was the first chapter in the long story of modern African liberation. It planted a seed of possibility, showing the entire world what freedom truly meant when a people were united and willing to fight for it. It was a declaration that Africa's destiny would be written by Africans themselves. This is the story of Adwa, a story of defiance, unity, and unwavering spirit. This is the spirit of Africa, and this is Lyric Chronicles, where forgotten voices rise again. Thank you for watching, and if you found this story as inspiring as we do, make sure to like, subscribe, and join us as we uncover more incredible chapters of our shared human history.